From game day to signing day, breaking down every snap and all the news on Alabama's top football recruits. It's time for Crimson and Blue Chips with your host, John Garcia Jr.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in to a new week of Crimson and Blue Chips. We are the audio authority on all things Alabama football as well as recruiting. We come to you twice a week for now, powered by BamaOnline.com, a part of 24/7 Sports. I'm your host, John Garcia Jr., and today we're going to play the balance game. We are going to talk plenty of Alabama football and then spur it over into recruiting, heavily based off of you, our listener, in Q&A fashion. But the first part of the show is an old friend returning. There's nothing quite like Kirk McNair on Crimson and Blue Chips, so that is what we deliver for our listeners on this Tuesday. We are in the middle of SEC Media Days, and it's kind of the unofficial start to the 2018 season, so there was no way we were going to transition without Mr. Kirk McNair, the man who has been to every single SEC Media Day. Nobody can literally know it better, so who better to bring back to Crimson and Blue Chips? We'll get you going with Kirk McNair on all things Alabama, predicting what Saban will or won't say, SEC predictions, all of that fun stuff, and then you guys take us home in classic Q&A form. So strap in, ladies and gentlemen. The July 17th edition of Crimson and Blue Chips starts now. It is that time of year, ladies and gentlemen, where we really get to shift the conversation back to the football field, back to full pads, and back to really the beginning of the season itself. SEC Media Days, of course, underway right now in Atlanta all week long. Alabama's turn is Wednesday, but we've still learned a couple of things early through Monday into Tuesday, and to help us sort it out, who else would we bring on, guys? Kirk McNair from BamaOnline.com, the man who's been to every single SEC Media Days. That alone deserves a title, recognition, all of that, but Kirk is humble there. Kirk, are you the only one who's been to every single SEC Media Days?
Well, there are a few other people who say they've been to every one. I know that I was, and I have very distinct memories of this one. Certainly because at one point Pat Dye was speaking at the podium, and Vince Dooley came in and sat down beside me and was listening to Pat. And when it came time for questions, Vince raised his hand and asked a question. So he was much informal in those days. Probably no more than 3 dozen, maybe reporters in the room. Maybe somewhere between 35 and 50, I'd say at the most. Not too many people there at that very first one.
Wow. So an opposing coach actually asked a question for sure at a media days.
Yeah.
Well, is there any chance anything like that could possibly happen this year or ever again?
No, nothing like that could happen. They might bump into one another in the hallway as they make their way around to all the different venues that they have to do. It's a pretty busy day for the coaches and the 3 players that each coach brings with him. It's there's the big print room, which is where I hang out, but they have internet rooms and television and radio. They have just a lot of things to do, and it's a full day for them. There's no question.
Sure. It's definitely changed. We'll just blame the internet for the lack of fun. Before we get to whatever Nick Saban will or won't say on Wednesday, I want to focus on some of the guys who were able to speak on Monday. Obviously, it gets really interesting when you look at some of these other schools and what they have to say. And no disrespect to Kentucky, but on Monday, Jimbo Fisher's first SEC Media Days and Ed Orgeron's SEC Media Days at LSU, I think that was really the bulk of the conversation. And obviously, there's always kind of like Alabama looming whenever those guys talk or those programs are brought to the table. Of course, each being SEC West institutions. So, Kirk, just generally from Monday, whether it's the speed of Jimbo's words or the updated version of Ed Orgeron, what did you kind of take away from Monday, and did you feel any kind of Alabama undertones when those guys took to the podium?
Well, I did, and first of all, I was going to say it when you mentioned that it was Jimbo Fisher's first SEC media days. I thought you were going to say it, and maybe Ed Orgeron's last.
I was
but
going to.
you
know me. you know me pretty good. I almost kind of hinted at that, but I was like, let me play this one down the middle. I was getting close to that, but I held off. But thanks for calling me out, Kirk. That's what this show is all about, man.
And then the other one, of course, was Mark Stoops. And there, there's a little bit of you can run a little thread through it because Jimbo Fisher was Nick Saban's coordinator, and then when at Florida State, Mark Stoops was one of Jimbo Fisher's coordinators, and also, of course, we'll get to this later. Jeremy Pruitt was a coordinator under both under both Jimbo Fisher and Nick Saban. So there are a lot of threads running through there, and the fact that Nick Saban, for the foreseeable future, will not have a year in which he doesn't play at least two former students, with so many of them in the SEC now. But in getting back to today, it was about Jimbo Fisher led off, actually. The first guy out of the chute on the first day of SEC meetings, first-year head coach, which I was curious about that timing, but it worked out well. Jimbo did a good job. He's been around a long time and knows all the coach speak. And then it was Mark Stoops, and we ended up with Ed Orgeron. And, in actual interview periods that we were in, Alabama's name came up a few times, but in the talk around, which is where you really get a feel for it, it's always Alabama. Can anybody play with Alabama? Can anybody upset Alabama? That's going to be the theme of this SEC Media Days, as it has been for several years with Nick Saban in charge of the program. But there were a couple of little specifics, particularly when it was brought up to Jimbo Fisher that his first four games include one against Clemson and one against Alabama, two of the, over the last 4 years in the college football playoff system, you'd have to say those are the two dominant teams. And he said something that I truly believe is true, not just coach speak. I believe it. He said, when you have games like that early in the season, your players are more focused, they're more motivated in their off-season workouts, which of course are going on right now. Most schools in the SEC will start their fall camps in the first week of August. I think maybe there might be one or two that actually get to start a little bit earlier, maybe the last day or two of July. But basically that was the Alabama reference from Jimbo Fisher, who of course, as we all know, worked for Nick Saban. But he also worked not only for Saban at LSU, but he also worked at Auburn, and he's had 13 years as an assistant in the SEC, so he knows the lay of the land. And I thought probably one of the interesting things that Ed Orgeron spoke on, he was asked about his first two games against Alabama and how they'd been, and they had been very tough games in which Alabama won both. And I thought it was very interesting that he talked about how Alabama's quarterback, and that would be Jalen Hurts, had made the plays that were the difference in the game. And, you kind of wondered if Ed Orgeron was maybe putting in a vote that Jalen Hurts win the starting job for Alabama, but I think that was the farthest thing from his mind. And he said, almost isn't good enough against Alabama. So that was a telling remark, I think, that you better, I think everybody does bring their best game, and sometimes even the best in my view, isn't quite good enough. So there were Alabama references all about, but it'll really heat up Wednesday for Alabama because that's when Nick Saban makes his appearance on the podium along with his three players. Within about there were about 5 players that I thought it could be. 3 of them, and it was. I thought it could be the 3 that are coming are Damian Harris, Ross Pierce-Baker, and Anthony Jennings, and I thought it would be also the possibility would have been Jonah Williams, and I thought a possibility would have been Raekwon Davis, but I'm not at all surprised at the 3 that Saban picked to come to Atlanta and face the media on Wednesday.
When's the last time Nick let a quarterback go to SEC Media Days at Alabama? Has he ever done it? Was it AJ?
I think AJ was the last one. I also think I may be wrong there. It may have been Blake Sims may have been there, and it may be that Coker was, but I don't absolutely remember that. Those player interviews are they have a very short news cycle. Those guys they're not just coached on the football field, they're coached up very well before they come to SEC Media Days, and not very much comes out of those player interviews, or certainly not from the coach interviews either, but it's a start.
Yeah, you get something out of it, even though it's a little overhyped, but we're just excited. We're excited football is around the corner. So no surprise that Nick did not send Jalen Hurts or Tua Tagovailoa. And by the way, I think Coach O listens to the podcast because my go-to Jalen Hurts defense is the LSU game, each of the last 2 years. So I think Coach O listens to the pod, or maybe he was just at the games. Either way, no surprise for Nick not to send Jalen or Tua especially. In terms of what Nick will do this time around, Kirk, as we said, you've been to every SEC Media Day, so that includes every single time Nick has ventured to Birmingham, or in this case, Atlanta. What is the most consistent thing about his strategy? Is it always just the simple, I'm not really giving anything to the media, this is all for my team? Or does it kind of change? Have you noticed a change in him in terms of how he deals with this widespread, 2,000 credentials, whatever it is, given out to the media, or does he change it up a little bit?
Well, I can't say that he's changed. I think he's been pretty consistent. He's like most coaches, he's going to answer what he wants to answer and not answer and not give you a real answer to things that he doesn't want to. And for instance, this year certainly will be who's your quarterback or any kind of question like that, which I know what his answer is going to be because he's already given it many, many times, which is that he doesn't decide who the quarterback's going to be. The quarterbacks decide who's going to be the starter. They'll do that by their performance in fall camp now, since Tua missed basically all of spring training, so it comes down to the fall camp auditions, and he also has said that a big part of that will be which guy wins the team. And I don't know Tua I don't know either one of them very well. I know Tua even less than Jalen, but it's very obvious to me in the interviews that we've had with Jalen Hurts that he's the kind of guy who would win the team. Now, if he's not the best quarterback, that doesn't matter. They'll go with the best guy. But that question will probably be handled. Would not surprise me at all if Nick Saban addresses that situation before the question and answer period even starts. The other thing that Nick Saban is really takes advantage of this opportunity is if he has something that's on his mind. It might be the transfer rule. It might be the red shirt rule. It might be the new kickoff rule. It might be something I haven't even thought of. But if he's got something on his mind about college football in general, maybe the SEC, maybe his team. It was RPOs for a while. It can be anything, and he will address that and use this forum to get his message out there, and he usually does an excellent job of it. I'd be shocked if he. I would not be shocked if he doesn't have one of those messages, maybe more than one this year, and I also would be really shocked if he didn't do a great job of it, because he does do a great job at SEC Media Days, even though the caveat being you're not going to learn a whole lot about things that you really want to know, like the quarterback who's going to be the starting quarterback. And he's also, he's probably going to have to address some other things. He's going to have to address the linebacker situation. Within a space of about, 48 hours, Alabama lost 2 linebackers this year. Vandarius Cowan dismissed from the team for an off-the-field issue, and Terrell Lewis having a second hard luck year. Last year it was an elbow injury in the Florida State game, the opening game of the year. They kept him out almost all the rest of the year. He came back a little bit and helped late in the year. And this year, an ACL suffered in one of his workouts last week. ACLs are funny. I don't mean funny and ha-ha funny. I mean they're a little hard to figure, because the surgeries, the technology in that's gotten better and better over the years. The rehab's gotten better and better over the years. That used to be, you hope you got a guy back in a year. And then it was, like 9 months. And now, you might get a guy back in 6 months. And I'm not going to say Lewis will be back this year at all, but, there's an outside chance maybe that he could get ready if Alabama had late bowl games, January 1st, like those games.
Like they've had.
Possibility. Well, yeah, which you pretty much get to count on. I'm not going to say would or wouldn't, but it's something to think about. And the new redshirt rule figures in on that too. If he could come back and play a little bit and not cost himself a year of eligibility. I think he will come back now. I've gotten off topic now, but I think now he's had 2 serious injuries, and I think his NFL future might be really helped if he could come back next year and have an injury-free year. Of course, the flip side of that is he might have another injury. Football's a contact sport, John. That. So there's no guarantees, but one guarantee right now is that he is those 2 injuries will count against him if he elects to go out in this year's draft. But again, I got way off topic, and I apologize for that.
No, a lot of people are curious about that. That's something that surely will be factored in regardless of the interpretation of the new redshirt rules. Kirk McNair joining us right here once again on Crimson and Blue Chips. Catch him every single day, BamaOnline.com, and he will be a very busy man on Wednesday when Alabama takes to the podium at SEC Media Days 2018. Kirk, I think it was the first time I was working for you at Bama Mag. I think Nick's philosophical point that time was about the defensive substitutions. Because remember, all these offenses were kind of becoming up-tempo, and Nick, it was kind of his first rebuttal to that, saying, well, that's fine, but you gotta if you're changing personnel, you got to let my defense have some time to adjust as well. So he really does kind of kick off the conversation for the rules or the newest thing every year. So that is a very good point by you. But getting back to the quarterbacks, Kirk, he's going to be asked about it. He's going to throw it away. We all know that. But I think what makes this one unique is that situation ties into the hot topic situation about transfers in general, and the threat of a transfer is here, at least as far as we know, whether you believe the Averian Hurts article from Bleacher Report, of course, Jalen's dad, but if you believe what Tua said to an elementary school, may be taken out of context, but that he was thinking about transferring should he not have gotten that opportunity against Georgia. Either way, the transfer question in regards to quarterbacks in particular can and probably will come up. Does Nick dismiss it just as easily as he dismisses the verbatim "who will be the starter" question, or could that be one where you actually you get a Saban rant combined with what is on his mind with the whole transfer, and he can kind of like shoot down millennials and their thinking and all that in one shot? Where do you think he goes with that?
That's that is a terrific question, and we hear that all the time. Usually when we're somebody's stalling for an answer, which I'm not, because I think that Saban has certainly given this plenty of thought and will have his answer ready for that. I, of course, can't predict what it'll be, nor can anyone else. But the fact that we mentioned the new redshirt rule, that really helps Jalen. It gives him 4 games to make a determination whether or not he wants to be a part of what's going on here, assuming he doesn't win the starting job. Nobody seems to think that there's a chance in the world that Jalen Hurts, who has been, in my opinion, pretty good quarterback for Alabama, when you consider all that goes into being a quarterback. All everybody seems to see these days is downfield passing, and there's no question Tua is a better passer than Jalen. I don't think anybody would argue that point. But there's a lot more that goes into it. And I'm not saying that Tua doesn't have all those other qualities too, but I am saying that Jalen Hurts has them. So there is that outside chance, I think we'd have to call it, that Jalen wins the job. And then that completely changes the narrative on what everyone's talking now insofar as transfer. But we're living in a transfer world. We all know that. And the quarterback position is evidence number one. It is that is the position that is most likely to transfer because most coaches play just one quarterback. We know that. It's an amazing thing that Coach Bryant, and I go back to him so often because that was sort of what I cut my teeth on. It never would have occurred to him to play just one quarterback. He told me one time, he said, when I think I've got the game won, I start thinking about next week and next year. And but he didn't even wait until the game was won. He played his second quarterback like he played a lot of second and third teamers in crunch time. So we'll see how Nick Saban handles the quarterback situation as well as the quarterback question. I think he'll handle the question just fine. Whether he handles the quarterback situation just fine once the season begins, you have to say is a tough thing to call because you're dealing with guys who want to win. They want to be starters. They're thinking about their futures, and only one can play at a time. Now, 2 can play, and Nick Saban has played 2 quarterbacks in the past. Most people think it won't work. I think it would be a nightmare for defensive coordinators if Alabama was alternating, and I don't mean one series here, one series there. I mean using both quarterbacks substantially in their game plan. And again, I don't know how he'll answer the question. I suspect he'll get that question. And I don't know, again, more important is how will he handle the actual situation this fall.
Yeah, that'll be fascinating as any development at SEC Media Days. But Kirk, you can't bring up Bear Bryant and have me just leave it alone. Obviously the game has changed. I mean, there's no debate about that. And the position of quarterback has kind of different value, maybe different stakes. Everything is plus or minus dependent on that guy. In theory, the blame or the glory, whatever, the quarterback gets all of it. But aside from the differences between quarterbacking now and before, I mean, what were the dynamics when Bear Bryant did that? Because obviously every kid wants to play and every kid wants to be the guy, the quarterback at the University of Alabama. What was there? I don't remember, but was there rifts created? Obviously, kids weren't transferring back then like they are now, but kind of how did he navigate that, I guess, personality-wise, between the quarterbacks. Was it ever an issue, or was it just something that just because of the culture we just never heard about?
Well, it was something that, first of all, Coach Bryant's personality was such, and Alabama was not quite as dominant then as now, but still the most dominant program in the country. And he was certainly the coach in the country. And the difference was, I think, that he played them. We were at Nebraska, and Jeff Rutledge was the quarterback, and things were going along just fine. And all of a sudden, Stedman Sheely was in at quarterback, and I got this. One of the Gophers for ABC came running down to my seat and said, "They need to know what's going on. Why is Sheely in the game?" And I said, "Coach Bryant plays more than one person at a position. There's nothing wrong with Rutledge. He'll be back in the game. Don't worry." And, they just could not fathom that. But Coach Bryant would explain it from time to time, say, "Look, they all practice. If they're all practicing hard and doing what we want them to do, they deserve the right to play." And that was part of his philosophy. The other part, as I mentioned, he knew he was going to have a quarterback the next year too, and he didn't want one that was completely raw.
So very interesting.
So that was. There are probably other things that went into it, but I'm not in. There may have been other things too, but those are the two main points I got from him.
Yeah, you wonder just if that is even possible in this era. Something obviously we're all going to have to wait and see during this 2018 season. But the last thing I got for you, Kirk, it's SEC Media Days. You're given all these papers to make all these predictions. It's probably a tablet by now. I haven't been in a few years. So we can't let you go without asking about your SEC predictions. I assume it begins and ends with Alabama in Atlanta once again. However, last year wasn't that way, and it's a new year. So is it all the same? Where are you kind of sitting? Where are you feeling right now, mid-July 2018 for the upcoming season?
Yeah, John, I've had a long-standing philosophy that I always think Alabama's going to win, and I'm almost always right. So I went with all wins for Alabama. I've already done my prediction. It's subject to change after I hear from some people maybe, but and right now I would say this, John, in the halls in Atlanta. Mississippi State's getting a lot of love. A lot of people are picking them as the dark horse challenger to Alabama. Nobody's picking anybody to beat Alabama that I've talked to. But I think that, I'm going with Alabama number one in the West, and I like Texas A&M. And this was before I heard Jimbo Fisher today. I like their personnel, and I think that he's the kind of coach that can get the most out of that. So I went with them, then Auburn, and Mississippi State, and then bringing up the rear, Ole Miss and Arkansas, which I think is a fair assumption. And then over in the East, which I don't know as well, I'll be the first to admit that. And I think South Carolina might be the sleeper over there. But I'm going to go ahead and pick Georgia to beat South Carolina in Columbia. That's an early game, too, early in the season. And so Georgia to win and South Carolina second. And I think those are clearly the two teams to watch over there with, Florida, Missouri, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, and Tennessee all still really having some talent issues. But and I know Missouri's got block, but still probably not enough around players over there. So I'm going Alabama and Georgia to have a rematch of the national championship game, but this year in the SEC championship game. And if it plays out that way, I don't think we'll get two in the college football playoff again. But that'll be a winner take all probably.
Just personal curiosity here. Are you buying the Dan Mullen Florida hype and just long term, or do you think he was kind of just in the right place at the right time when they had Leak and Tebow and Newton and the Pouncey twins and Harvin and all these guys?
A little of both. I think that first of all, I think that Dan Mullen's reputation, which is sort of a crossover, his reputation is based on pretty much on Tim Tebow and Dak Norris. And you look at, if you ask somebody, what do you think Dan Mullen's annual average record at Mississippi State was, I think the average college football fan would estimate it was a lot higher than it really was. But I think he's a good coach. I've never doubted that. And I think that, and again, I'll go back to Coach Bryant in 1980. I think we went to maybe 79 or 80. We went to Florida, and I set up an interview with Coach Bryant with one of my cohorts in the business that I was in then, the magazine business, to talk to Coach Bryant about Charlie Pell, who was the new coach there. And Coach Bryant said, Florida is a sleeping giant. They just need the right person to put it all together, and I think Charlie Pell's that person. Well, Charlie Pell did put it together. He didn't enjoy the fruits of it, in part because of NCAA violations. But Florida has so many people and so many good athletes that is always the team to watch, in my opinion, in the SEC East. So I think Mullen probably will get it done. They're desperately in need of upgrading their facilities. You hear that all the time. But Texas A&M has got these fabulous facilities. Alabama does, and people are trying to catch up as fast as they can. But that takes lots and lots of money and quite a bit of time too. So, but I think Mullen will have everything he needs in place in Florida. He knows how to be a head coach, which he didn't when he left Florida, but he does now. And I think that eventually, I don't think this year, but I think eventually that'll be the power in the East.
Yeah, talk about another team with some quarterback questions, but quite on the other side of where Alabama sits right now. Just curious there personally, Kirk, but what a luxury for us here at CABC to grab Kirk McNair for really our transitionary episode. Hey, the season is pretty much here, so there's no other person who I would like to kind of kick off that transition than you, Mr. McNair. Can't thank you enough for joining us once again, and I hope we can do it again soon.
My pleasure, John. Thank you for having me.
Man, it really is a treat anytime we can get Kirk McNair on the show. And if we do go to 3 days a week, we can return the hashtag McNair Wednesdays potentially sometime down the road. So thank you to Kirk McNair of Bama Online for rejoining CABC. He is by far the most tenured guest and consistent guest on this program. And for that, we are incredibly grateful and lucky. And Kirk, he hadn't missed a step. He hadn't missed a beat. He's getting up there, but he's still rolling along like it's nobody's business. And that's part of what makes him so darn great. So as we pivot to you guys into Q&A, we'll certainly talk more recruiting. I wanted to get going with Kirk because, look, we've basically been a recruiting podcast for the last 2 months, with the exception of some Q&A about some quarterback battle. You may have heard about it, or something else. So we wanted to give the team its due, and again, we'll be more balanced, hopefully, moving forward because, look, the season is here. It is time. SEC Media Days is kind of annoying, drawn out. You don't learn a ton, but it is the unofficial smoke signal in the air that, hey, football is right here. Workouts are ending, practice is beginning, and obviously that leads to training camp and leads to football games. So really excited about that, and always excited to bring Kirk back on the show. But without further ado, let's jump to you, our listeners, and get into what you guys would like to talk about. We'll play a little bit of catch up, but there's also a good amount of new questions in via Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, what have you. We're going to start on Facebook with good friend of the show, Tobias Brookins, curious about Alabama's 2019 recruiting class in regards to the rankings, in relation to the recruiting rankings and the highest ever recorded. Tobias said, hoping you can answer my other question. What would it take for Alabama to break the recruiting's record? So obviously we're going off of 24/7 Sports, which is where we're at. The composite rankings are literally everybody's rankings concocted into a magic formula and spit out all together. And it didn't take long for me to kind of breeze back through every class because, look, the recruiting industry is like 20 years old at most. So we really are only looking at 20 years of data. So we can't look back at, Bear Bryant's class of 1976 or anything like that. So in the last 20 years, which I think everybody can now understand, that is the era of the recruiting outlet, not recruiting service. We are not charging kids to get stars or anything, but people still call it a recruiting service, a recruiting outlet. We cover recruiting. We don't, further recruiting. We're not that a part of the process like that, I should say. Anyway, so in 20 years of data, Alabama has the number 2, 3, 4, and 5 highest ranked classes of all time. And the highest ranked was the 2014 class, which you guys remember was star-studded, right? It wasn't very long ago. And on Scout.com, we had the most 5 stars in the history of the network go to one school. It was 7 in that class. And remember, this was the Deshaun Hand, who was the number 1 player by some. John Allen was in that class. It was really loaded up and down, offense and defense. It was an extremely loaded group. I think that was the O.J. Howard, Robert Foster class. I mean, it was stacked. It was stacked. So anyway, that was the highest rated Bama class. But like I said, Bama had 2, 3, 4, and 5. Number 1 went to the Florida Gators class of 2010 with an overall score, again, on 24/7 Sports composite, of 324.62. Now, Bama has hit 320 a couple of times, but that 324 mark is the highest. For reference, Bama's highest ranked classes have been in the 323 range twice. So you see how close Alabama has come to setting that record. And some think, and Tobias, I see this is where you're going with this question, some think this Alabama class has the foundation to perhaps surpass, eclipse, overtake that Florida Gator record. So when you look at Florida's class that year, again, this is the 2010 Gator class under Urban Meyer. There was several 5 stars, right? I mean, that's a given. There were 5 on the composite. Ronald Powell, Dominic Easley, Sharif Floyd, Matt Elam, and Josh Shaw. You've got to have your top end of 5 stars in the class. I mean, I don't think it's too hard to figure out. If you want the number 1 class of all time, you need a handful of 5 stars minimum to spur that group. You also need numbers overall. You need volume. So some of these great Alabama classes were smaller, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, whatever. Even 25 could be considered small if you look at the overall rankings. The more the merrier in this case. It's not the smartest thing, but that's what it is. And this particular Florida Gator class had 28 prospects. But here's what it gets interesting. We always talk about this Alabama class in 2019 is so blue chip heavy. 20 commitments right now, 19 of them 4 stars or better. If you look back to 2010, 28 players in that Florida Gator class. However, 6 of them 3 stars on the 24/7 Sports composite. So that means 22 of the 28 were blue chip recruits. So the ratio of blue chip recruits relative to overall recruits is better right now for Alabama than with Florida's record-breaking class of 2010. But again, volume. 22 blue chips. Right now, Bama is at 19 blue chips. So it's certainly in range, but you actually have to get there. And also, you got to be top heavy. You got to have at least a handful of 5 stars. And right now, while Alabama has a great blue chip ratio, just one 24/7 Sports composite 5-star on the current version of the commitment list. And again, that can change. Amari Kite, Antonio Alfano, Kevin Harris, Shane Lee. These are all top 100 type guys who theoretically would have a shot to get into 5-star range at some point. Even guys that are on the border of the top 100. DeMarco Hellams, Brandon Turnage, Byron Young, Justin E. Boygby. These are all top 120 prospects on the 24/7 Sports composite. So those guys could theoretically jump up to 5-star status, but for right now, it's just Pierce Quick. So obviously, that means this Bama class needs to add 5 stars. But we know there's a lot of 5 stars on the 24/7 Sports composite that Bama has a legitimate shot for. So the Gators had 5 in that group. So let's say Bama gets to 6 in this group. And for this exercise, I'm using a feature that is very easy for users to use on 24/7 Sports. Click the football recruiting tab and go down to class calculator, and you can kind of play with this and see what kind of numbers and scores Alabama can get plugging in certain recruits. So for this exercise, we assumed there weren't any decommitments in this class, and we were going to add some 5 stars to the group to get up to the same number of commits that Florida had, 28. But remember, Bama's blue chip ratio better than Florida's, so I think in projecting the class, you keep that steady. You hold true to that, meaning Bama's not bringing in any more 3 stars the rest of the way. I don't think that's off base. I think that's very possible, if not probable, at this point. But again, the focus right now is 5 stars. Which 5 stars can get to that point? So Florida had 5 in 2010. Let's say Bama gets up to 6 in this 2019 class. And again, it's July 17th. This is a very big hypothetical, but the question from Tobias was, what would it take for Bama to get past that record-breaking number of 324.62 points on the 24/7 Sports composite. So assuming Bama retains Pierce Quick, we've got to add 5 stars to this group for Alabama. Some of them are very simple to pencil in. Clay Webb, a guy that we have projected in the class probably every single time we've ever done a class of 2019 prediction. Trey Sanders, a former commitment, top running back on the board, and a guy that a lot of people feel right now Bama has tangible momentum for. That's 2 5 stars. How about Daxton Hill, top safety in the class, deciding somewhat soon, coming off of an official visit to Alabama where, again, people feel like momentum is tangibly there. He is number 3. Nakobe Dean, inside linebacker, such a big freaking priority moving forward. We all know about the attrition at the position, the injuries, all of that stuff. Nakobe Dean takes the next 5-star spot. That one's going to be a lot harder than some of these other ones because of just the amount of programs in the race, whether it's UGA, whether it's Texas A&M, and heck, you got to get the kid out of Mississippi, which is an ideal or a non-ideal situation in and of itself. However, let's say Bama plays its cards right and Nakobe Dean is added. And then you need the wild card. You need another 5-star who maybe at this point I don't particularly see in the fold, but as we'll reveal in Q&A moving forward, a lot of you guys are starting to see in the fold. Bama needs another edge rusher. Let's go Kayvon Thibodeau, number 1 player on the 24/7 Sports composite. So there are your 6 5-stars, Thibodeau, Sanders, Hill, Webb, Dean, and Quick. So now you have your top-heavy group of 5-star guys. And that brings the current commitment list from 20 to 25. But remember, the Florida Gators brought in 28 for that class. But this is the other necessity in potentially breaking the record. You need the spaces. You need the availability to sign 27, 28, 29 guys. And hello, Bama has that in this class. We've talked about it for 5+ months now. Bama's going to have the allotted space to get up to that point. So you got to fill in some other blue chip recruits to get to that point. So again, 25 was the number that we're at currently in looking at this group with those 5 stars added. So that means 3 4-stars need to be added. So let's say Bama doesn't necessarily hit on their number 1 prospect on the board, but does hit on 2 or 3 at certain positions. So let's go to defensive tackle. Maybe not Ishmael Sopsher, but let's say Bama is able to bring in Fa'atui Tuitele, who is now a 4-star on the 24/7 Sports composite. That is something that would not surprise many people. So let's pencil him into the class as a 4-star addition. Let's go to offensive line. We already said Clay Webb brought in for the interior. What about tackles? We know Bama wants another tackle or a true tackle type in this class. The number 1 guy they would love to add would probably be Darnell Wright out of West Virginia. But let's say Jeremy Pruitt gets a real big recruiting win against his old boss and he goes to Tennessee. So Bama regroups and goes all in for Evan Neal, the star of the opening finals, and gets him back in the fold, another former commitment and IMG ascender, just like Trey Sanders. So he's another 4-star addition. One more spot left to get to 28. Let's go to wide receiver, just for the fun of it, and say that Bama does record a signature flip. We always talk about Alabama flipping prospects, and this year there's a big group that Bama would love to flip from other schools. But as time moves forward, would Bama like to flip anybody more than an Auburn commitment in Birmingham at a premier program with a bunch of ties to the Auburn Tigers? Of course it would. So let's go George Pickens at the wide receiver position. Bama's long been looking for that big wide receiver. So let's say, just for this exercise, Bama gets it done with a huge Iron Bowl flip, something that really hasn't happened over the last couple of years. Again, I think Stephen Roberts was the last big Iron Bowl flip. Before that, it was Reuben Foster, when it was kind of like every year there was a big one. There hasn't been one in the last few years. So let's go George Pickens to kind of stir up that rivalry a little bit more moving forward, as if that's needed, but that's a story for another day. So there are your 28 verbal commitments. Again, the additions: Thibodeau, Sanders, Hill, Webb, Dean, Tuitele, Neal, and George Pickens. So those are your 8 guys to round out the class of 2019. And once you put those guys into the class calculator, a feature, again, only available on 24/7 Sports, you get to hit the button that says calculate, and you get a score. And for that class, again, assuming there are no decommitments from the current group, which is probably an unfair assumption, I do expect some movement with this group of 20 guys. I've said it over the last few weeks. However, just for this exercise, let's say all those guys stick, Bama doesn't drop them, and they don't drop Bama. That gives this 2019 class under Nick Saban, with all of these new assistants and all of the turnover, a score on the 24/7 Sports composite of 326.91. Now, going from 324 to 396 doesn't sound like a big jump, but when you consider that Bama has been in the 320s a handful of times and yet does not hold the record, that is a big bump, a significant bump. So in this scenario, Bama would not only set the pace in the history of the current recruiting outlets, 20 years or so, but it would blow by the mark set by those Florida Gators in the class of 2010. That class, 28 prospects, 5 5-stars, 17 4-stars, 6 3-stars. This Alabama class that we have now projected, 28 overall prospects, 6 5-stars in the group. So you take them out of the number for 28, that leaves 22. There's only 1 3-star right now in Will Reichard. So that means 21 4-star prospects in the class and just the 1 3-star. So that is the way for Bama to blow right by Florida in terms of basically everything that led to that record-setting class. Alabama's average would be high. Alabama's overall score would be the highest. And in terms of 5 stars, the second highest crop I've seen in the recruiting outlet era. But the difference between this Bama class in the projections versus that 2014 class that we referred to with the 7 5-stars is how top heavy it is and the blue chip ratio. Bama signed some 3-stars in that 2014 class. There would only be one in this 2019 group. So hopefully, Tobias, you got your fix and you know what it would take for Bama. And it's obviously very fluid, and this group will not be the final group. But just for the sake of getting to that number, this is what it would take for Bama. So, in other words, it would take not settling for any 3-stars, accomplishing a lot of goals, maybe flipping a big-time fish or two, and obviously landing a good deal of uncommitted, top of the board, number one at their position type guys for Alabama the rest of the way. Great question from Tobias that came via Facebook. Let's move now to Twitter, where you can join the conversation at CABC Pod. Tremaine Williams at TreyWilliams23 tweets the show. Hey, John, love the show. Big time fan. Who you got, Ayabi Anoma or Kayvon Thibodeau? This is a great question because I think in terms of rankings, these guys are right there. Ayabi Anoma was the number 3 overall player in the final 24/7 Sports rankings of 2018. Kayvon Thibodeau right now the number 2 player in the 24/7 Sports rankings. Both edge rushers, both guys who show incredible upside in their final year. But the difference is, I think Thibodeau's more of a football player. And we talked about this with producer Kev recently. Thibodeau isn't the freakiest guy. Now, this is splitting hairs here. Compared to Nolan Smith and Zach Harrison, even Kevin Harris, Ayabi Anoma, Tim Williams, guys like that, his first step isn't with those other guys. But a lot of those guys we just mentioned, they really rely on that first step. That is the bread and butter. Thibodeau can beat you with speed and that first step, but it is far from his bread and butter as an edge rusher. At 235 pounds, there is power there. There is polish there. As Kevin said, there is a deep bag of tricks for Kayvon to rely on. He can beat you inside. He can beat you outside. He can go through you. He has great hands to get a blocker off of you and disengage. He can redirect very well. Great short area quickness. He's really the complete package off of the edge as a football player versus the run, versus the pass, length, IQ, all of that. Anoma, you're talking about a wide open, full throttle, torque, pickup, all of those fun adjectives, guy screaming off the edge with minimal experience and minimal polish. So in one regard, these guys are almost opposites. So your question is twofold to me, Tremaine. If we're talking about for the 2018 season at a school like Alabama, when maybe you need an edge rusher because one of them just tore his ACL, which actually has happened, I take Kayvon Thibodeau because I know in a pinch, situational third down rusher, whatever, he's just a little more ready to make that happen, to make that play, to make the best football play. But now, are you talking 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now as we play the projection game from high school to the NFL? I got to go Ayabi Anoma. Yes, he is not the football player Kayvon Thibodeau is today, but in just 2 years of football, he has made significant strides, and there wasn't an edge rusher last year who flashed like Ayabi Anoma flashed. All those great first step elements we talk about with Nolan Smith, Zach Harrison, Kevin Harris, Ayabi still may have the best first step, and he is longer, 6'4", 6'5", and heavier than all those guys we're talking about, including Thibodeau, 245, 250 right now. So you talk about the height, weight, speed elements, and on paper, it is Ayabi Anoma who is the freakier of all of these guys, and that may include Zach Harrison, who ran 4.4 at 6'6". Ayabi may be freakier than that, which is as freaky as it gets in modern college football or NFL football as we project out to. So if we're going long term, give me Ayabi Anoma. That upside is almost unlimited. We almost don't know how good Ayabi Anoma could be. He could be a freakier Myles Garrett. He could be a flashier Myles Garrett, which is just unfathomable at this point. Kayvon Thibodeau, I think, is a great football player right now. He is more of a conventional edge guy. So it's almost like pick your preference. Would you rather have Khalil Mack, who may be Kayvon Thibodeau, or would you rather have Myles Garrett? Again, both of them are top 5 picks. Both of them can sack the quarterback 20 times in the NFL, and it wouldn't surprise anybody, but they do it in different ways. So I think that's the difference between the two, short term versus long term. But either way, Bama's lucky to have one, and the fact that they're even in the conversation for two, Tremaine, is kind of an embarrassment of riches. But hey, that's following Alabama recruiting these days. Next question, also curious about Kayvon Thibodeau, coming in from Josh R. at Insider_Alabama. Just wanted to hear a little bit more on your thoughts on Kayvon Thibodeau. You said, as of today, FSU probably leads, but 3 Bama crystal balls have come in recently, with one being from Steve Wiltfong, who said Bama definitely leads and FSU trails. That is all correct, Josh. There's no doubt that Bama has some momentum with Kayvon. It's very clear. You heard it at the opening when we spoke to him, and he was on the show. You've seen multiple visits on his own dime. The last thing he said on the podcast 2 weeks ago was, "I'll be back," so we know there's at least one more Alabama visit on deck. Bama is in his final 5. All of that jazz. It is very clear Bama has some momentum. I've never debated that. But at different points, people on the West Coast, and this isn't a slight on Steve Wiltfong, who has a great pulse on national recruiting, maybe as good as anybody's pulse on a true national scale in this industry. But guys on the West Coast, in California, sources there on the ground, and I wish I could tell you some of these sources because they're about as close to Kayvon as it gets. Sources there have alerted us to say, yes, Bama is right there and may be the leader. But for the longer period of time, so longer than Bama's current run of buzz with Kayvon, Florida State was becoming the school that was the clear leader. And it was a combination of very tangible things. First of all, this Willie Taggart staff at FSU was at Oregon. So they were recruiting Kayvon already at another school, but now they have a better, uniform to show. They have a better foundation, better conference, no disrespect, all of these things to show him. And he's been on campus. So, and Oregon's still in his top 5 and all that, but let's be honest, they're trailing. So the longevity of Oregon compared to the turnover-filled Alabama staff, save for Tosh Lupoy, who, of course, was the first coach Kayvon mentioned, was the foundation for the thinking that if he was going to the Southeast, FSU was a tad more likely than Alabama. Again, this is over the long-standing stretch of his recruitment, not just recently, where, again, Bama has held some of this momentum. Outside of that, independent of FSU and Bama, there is still a large group of people, including those on the West Coast, who think the kid ends up at USC because he's the top player in California, and USC's been recruiting him for 50 years. I'm exaggerating, but you understand what I'm saying. My point is this, Josh. Momentum is one thing. Landing the kid is another. And with Kayvon, we know, first of all, the kid is well-traveled. He's been everywhere he's wanted to go multiple times, really. And he's going to be back in the Southeast in 10 days visiting the Florida Gators and Florida State Seminoles. Maybe Alabama can get him back on campus then, but either way, we know he'll be back because he said so right here on CABC. So the kid is as well-traveled a national recruit as maybe we've ever seen because he's doing all this without taking official visits. So that means twists and turns remain, and we know he's already a long tenured recruit. He's long been considered a top guy, and he's a late decider. He is a December, January decision maker. So with official visits still to be done, unofficial visits still to be done, there's still some twists and turns left. So I recognize the Bama momentum with Thibodeau, but I'm not ready to call it either way because it is very clear that the kid has enjoyed the spotlight, the kid has relished in this spotlight, and the kid will continue to take trips, which is the foundation of changing your mind. So while that top 5 is pretty locked in, and really it's a top 3, Bama, Florida State, and USC, still a long way to go. Remember, a year ago, everyone thought the kid was going to LSU because he has family in Louisiana. So if you would have told me back then, hey, Bama's going to get Kayvon Thibodeau, I would have said, yeah, it doesn't look like it right now. So that's the point. You don't focus on the now, you focus on the long term. It's just like ranking a kid. It's great that a kid is doing very, very well on Friday nights, and that is really the foundation of what we do. But when you rank the kid, it's about Saturdays, and really it's about Sundays. You see what I'm saying? You see the correlation there? So I'm looking at the Sunday approach, if you will, with Kayvon Thibodeau's recruitment. Crystal balls are fun, right? It gives you a gauge of where the thinking is today. And that's important. The crystal ball isn't a projection pick. The crystal ball is a right now pick. And a lot of the crystal balls submitted in this industry on 24/7 Sports are about what we're thinking right now. So right now, Steve Wiltfong is feeling Bama. But Steve is a crystal ball master, and he's changed picks all the time. So would it shock me if he changed Thibodeau's in 2 months? No, it wouldn't, because we know this thing has some twists and turns remaining. But he's giving Bama the benefit of the doubt because of Tosh Lupoy, the sustainability, the priority level, and the fact that Alabama doesn't miss on guys like this when they do grab the lead basically at any point. So that's kind of where I'm at with it, Josh. Hopefully that is what you were looking for. But there's no doubt Kayvon Thibodeau will be much more of a prospect to discuss on this show going forward than we thought 6 months ago. Jay chiming in at JS Roll Tide. Barton Simmons has said, you're going with all the national guys here today, guys. I hear you. Barton Simmons has said Antonio Alfano is definitely a 5-star player talent-wise, but his off-field concerns are keeping him from getting that 5th star. He also said that if he goes through his senior year with no problems, he'll get the 5th star. Do you agree he is a 5-star? I don't, Jay. I think his position versatility is very intriguing, and he reminds me of a guy we just bumped up to 5 stars, actually, in terms of height, weight, athleticism, in 5-star Purdue commitment, as weird as that sounds, George Karlaftis out of Indiana, who we loved at the opening. If Antonio Alfano would have went, which he was supposed to go, but depending on who you talk to, he didn't go for reason X or Y. Nothing illegal, but obviously still head-scratching to some degree. That's 2 Alabama commitments invited that didn't sustain it all the way through with tight end Jaleel Billingsley and Alfano. The difference is, I think Karlaftis has already embraced the fact that while he is big and athletic, he's going to be a hand-in-the-dirt guy. So he is getting his valuable experience coming off the edge and playing inside with his hand in the dirt. As opposed to Antonio Alfano, whose position versatility is almost a curse in my opinion, because while he's 6'4", 280 plus, he wants to be a stand-up guy. He is still in the mold of thinking that he is a stand-up edge rusher, which when you project to Saturdays and especially to Sundays, limits you a little bit because, yes, he is athletic, and there's no doubt that the numbers validate that. But when you're talking about Saturdays and Sundays in the SEC and the NFL, that means you're covering slot receivers and running backs. And I don't care how athletic you are at 6'4", 280. Are you going to find a niche doing that at that size? I'm just not sure. So the sooner he embraces on field that he is going to be a hand-in-the-dirt guy on the edge, perhaps even on the interior of a defensive line, like George Karlaftis has already done, now you can start to see some of that experience gathering and building. Right now he's in New Jersey. He's blowing by dudes because he's bigger, faster, stronger than almost everybody he's going up against. But what did Minkah Fitzpatrick do in that same area his senior year that really made us feel great about that 5-star label. He moved inside to safety and said, you know what? I'm probably going to play a lot of this at the next level and beyond, so let me embrace it now. And let me show you how I can impact the game at this position. I'd love to see that from Antonio Alfano before I'm ready to call him a 5-star. Move down, get your hand in the dirt, and this is obviously independent of any potential off-field issues. I'm just talking about 5-star talent. He's got the tools to do it, but we need to see it. We need to see some of it. And I think that's what we're waiting for, or that's what I'm waiting for with Antonio Alfano. Wanting to be a stand-up guy is really cool and fun, and it's sexy, and it's, the pathway to being a number one pick, but at his size, it's just, we really hadn't seen that too much. So let's move to the position you're going to play on Saturdays and maybe Sundays. Embrace it, get your reps in, get the experience in, and we'll feel better about that 5-star label. Again, when it comes to rankings, guys, it's mid-July. We're going all the way to mid-January with these rankings. So we've got several months to go before all the bows are tied. Carl Lesnar going to chime in here with a question here before we wrap up. Good afternoon, John. There are 4 players that Alabama is trying to flip. Nolan Smith, George Pickens, DeMarvin Leal, and Akeem Dent. The over-under 50%. Does Nolan Smith flip? Does Pickens flip? Does Dent flip? Does Leal flip? The last one is a defensive lineman from Texas. Thanks for answering my questions. Good questions, Carl. Well, obviously we did our fun projections for the rest of the class, and we had George Pickens indeed flipping from Auburn to Alabama. So in that exercise, we gave Bama one of these 4 flips. And really the reason, in addition to blue chip recruit and needing a wide receiver, really my reasoning was just, hey, this hadn't happened in a while. Bama likes to return the favor at points. So why not with this guy? And I see that same argument with DeMarvin Leal. Remember, Texas A&M, a bit of a thorn in Alabama's side last year. Flipped Bobby Brown, got the commitment of Vernon Jackson, the linebacker out of Texas. So Texas A&M kind of got Bama on a couple of guys last year. So in that same light we talked about with Pickens, wouldn't Bama want to flip DeMarvin Leal, a defensive lineman from Texas, committed to Texas A&M? Heck yeah, they would. And look, they need defensive linemen. It's very, very clear. So maybe instead of Fatui Tuitele, DeMarvin Leal is the guy to satisfy that final spot, if there is only one theoretical final spot out there. So I could see that happening. I think Pickens and Leal are the most likely of those 4 that you mentioned. I think Dent is more solid to FSU than most of us had considered. And Nolan Smith is starting to slow this thing down. He's given Bama his look. He's given Clemson his look. The kid's from Georgia. He's recruiting for Georgia. He's probably going to Georgia. Number 1 player in the country on 24/7 Sports. I think Bama doesn't give up here, and he respects that, and has only spoken very highly and glowingly praiseworthy of Alabama. But at the end of the day, I think he's a Georgia Bulldog. He's a very tough flip. But until he stops taking visits to Tuscaloosa, we'll see. But the over-under, I think Pickens, I think Leal is the most likely flip of all 4, then Pickens, then Dent, and I think Nolan Smith is the hardest flip from those guys. So for your exercise, Carl, I'll say if it's 50%, I'll take the over on Leal. Pickens, I'm almost at push status, but I'll take the over just to for the sake of symmetry here, and take the under on Dent and Nolan Smith. Final question coming in here from Raphael Monroy via Twitter. Hope all is well. What's your take on Latu? I'm assuming he means Cameron Latu. If he grasps the playbook, I feel like he has a chance to get some significant playing time. Do you think the commitments start to slow down? Roll Tide Roll from Long Island, New York. Shout out to Rico, a.k.a. West Coast Tide fans. I like that. Shout out, Raphael. Rico, if you're listening, continued health, my brother. So 2 questions there. I'll start with the commitments. Yeah, they're going to slow down, mainly because of the time of year. SEC Media Days. Really, there's only one more recruiting event this summer before everyone focuses on the season. That will be Champions Cookout 2.0, 11 days from today, July 28th. There's going to be some big names there, so you never know. But after that point, it should slow down a little bit. But there could be one more little boost of momentum. A lot of these kids want to get the decision done before their senior seasons begin. And when you look at some of these highly rated guys on Alabama's board, like Daxton Hill, some of these others, they want to have commitments out of the way by the start of their senior season. So you could still see a splash or two from Bama in 2019 before the season begins. But compared to the last few months, yeah, it'll definitely slow down. I mean, Bama was adding dudes faster than we could even recap on this show. So in that regard, yes, it will certainly slow down because it has to. There's 27, 28 spots, 20 occupied right now. I mean, it's just simple math. Over the next 6 months, it's got to slow down at some point. In your question about Cameron Latu, I think he needs some time. I think he needs to redshirt, and it's going to take him some time to physically be ready to play at the SEC level. He's got the length and frame and really good grit and athleticism already, but I think he needs to put on some good weight and really get up to speed tech-wise if he's going to play on the edge. Now, the injury to Terrell Lewis means that there's one less guy theoretically in front of him as a stand-up edge guy. So in that regard, yeah, he might be a little closer to playing than he was a week ago, but that doesn't mean he's necessarily ready. I think Ayabi Anoma, who we talked about earlier, is going to be much more well-positioned to play, especially following the Lewis injury. And let's not forget that Bama has, Christian Miller, Anthony Jennings, Jamie Mosley, a lot of good players returning on the edge, in addition to some guys who can play on the edge from previous classes like LeBron Ray, etc. So I think it's a tough path to playing time for Latu, but he's one spot closer, so you just never know. But I would be surprised just based on where he is as an athlete right now and where he's going, the University of Alabama. That's a lot, I think. So that's where I'm at with Cameron Latu. But stranger things have happened. He's got the frame. And look, everybody needs a situational pass rusher. So who's to say he won't be in the conversation to potentially scream off the edge there on third downs? Either way, that will do it for today's podcast. I want to thank you guys for listening through over an hour of content. Of course, I want to thank Kirk McNair, the man, the myth, the legend. BamaOnline.com. Check out his work daily. Again, Alabama is up Wednesday at SEC Media Days. Auburn Thursday morning if you're curious about little brother. So keep an eye on Bama Online for all your coverage. The crew is already churning out things from SEC Media Days. Again, we're going to focus on the team for a good bit moving forward, and then we'll kind of gear it back down to recruiting as we get closer to Champions Cookout 2.0. And then, of course, the 2018 season. So that is the plan. Stay connected with us via Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of those fun things. And we will hopefully see you in about 48 hours for a Thursday edition of CABC. God bless. Garcia out.